Every single day, there are more and more witnesses coming out saying they've seen these horrific creatures like gargoyles, Bigfoot, werewolves, lizardmen, and other horrific cryptids that venture the North America. No matter if we're out in the woods hunting or lounging by our house, we don't seem to be safe from seeing these things. Tonight, we're going to look at 10 different encounters with different creatures across the country. This is 10 horrifying creature encounters. Story 1. The Meeting Creek Encounter. Meeting Creek, a small hamlet with a population of only 21. Though this small, sleepy corner of society in central Alberta was home of a sighting that its residents wish it was never a part of. Meeting Creek is located just off of Highway 56, and it's something that looks like a living version of a Rockwell painting. Though on the night of August 21st of 2018, as the sun began to rise up to the sky and erase the unknown darkness that is the night, as there are breathtaking sights to see by means of scenery. I spoke with a retired librarian who wanted her name omitted from this article out of fear of ridicule by those around her. Seeing something like the Deerman would make one appear a tad bit off. This isn't anything new, as many of those who have seen a Bigfoot or even the Loch Ness Monster have gone through their fair share of ridicule. It was early morning, and she awoke to her routine of making herself a pot of coffee and making her breakfast. Though she lived alone, she never felt scared, but when that moment came on that fateful day, when only but a double glass pane window separating her from what could only be described as a creature not of this world. While she looked out her window as the coffee was brewing, there standing just a few yards away was the Deerman. She recalled that it stood perfectly still like a statue. Their eyes were locked and neither one of them blinked, and before she knew it, the creature slowly made its way to the window. Its non-blinking eyes were almost hypnotic, she described. But as this bond was made, it was quickly cut off as it turned around and began to make its way back home to where it came. But not before taking a few of the crab apples from her tree. Ever since then, she has continued to wake up at the same time every single day in the hopes of catching a glimpse of what she said was the most majestic animal she's ever seen. She never felt fear like the others who've reported their encounters with the Deerman. But maybe the Deerman isn't that bad after all. Maybe it's just misunderstood. Who knows, honestly? But as I report my findings on an almost daily basis, I'm finding myself having a warm place in my heart for the elusive Deerman. I hope you do as well. Story 2. The Skinwalker in Montana. After last night, I am a believer that skinwalkers exist and still roam freely. I am still terrified of what I saw, and I wasn't the only one that witnessed it. My girlfriend and I had just gotten into our vehicle and were about to head out for a drink around 10:30 p.m. Now, before I continue, I want to paint a little picture of our surroundings, but I don't want to give too much information of my specific location or anything like that, just to be safe. I will say we are staying in a public lodging in Montana on a hiking trip vacation. Our vehicle was in a fairly vacant lot with a 12-foot fenced-in enclosure at the end of it. We had just gotten into our car, like I said before, and I turned the vehicle on. The automatic lights flipped on, revealing what I immediately knew had to be a skinwalker. It sprung forward from its previous sitting position and ran about 3 very fast steps before leaping over this fence. And its body, its body scared the hell out of me. It had light tan skin, but it was very spindly. Think Slender Man build, but it was only about 6 to 7 feet tall. Its arms were long as shit, with thin, long fingers that looked almost like claws. The head had a human shape to it, but the eyes. It turned to look at us in that brief moment, and there was no light reflection from the eyes. Nothing. Just blackness. It all happened in less than 5 seconds. I turned toward my girlfriend, hoping I didn't see what I just saw. She sat there, staring at the fence and could only whisper, "Drive." I couldn't move. I kept saying, "That was a skinwalker. That was a skinwalker." before she finally was able to turn towards me and basically scream at me to drive. I got us the hell out of there and we proceeded to get to the bar and get shit-faced, refusing to ever talk about it. She still won't talk to me about it, but I think according to legends, you're not supposed to talk about it. I swear on my honor as a man that I am not making this up or exaggerating anything. Should we leave the area? This was only last night. Story 3. The Stickman Entity. I saw a Stickman entity when I was a kid through the door hole in my parents' flat. I was going to the elementary school, so this must have happened in the early to mid-90s, possibly around 93 to 95. This happened in Turkey. It was a sunny afternoon in April, and I was waiting for my friend to come and play PC games together. I heard a sound coming from the apartment's corridor and thought my friend had arrived. I went to the door to peek through the door hole. I saw a stickman-like figure standing out in front of our neighbor's door. It was not black, though. It looked like it was made out of clean light brown wood. It had black spheres for hands, feet, and head. Visually, its body, limbs, and the black spheres were identical to giant matchsticks in color and proportion. Even weirder, it was wearing a yellowish fedora hat with a transparent dark fabric hanging from the edges. I could still see that it had no facial features through the thin fabric. I was very confused, but kept watching it, and it did not move for about 5 seconds. Then, it made a slightly quick wavy movement with its arms, and that scared me off. My mom was at home, so I ran to her and told her that there's something in the apartment complex. We saw nothing when we checked back. Later, I discarded it as an optical illusion since I saw this through the door hole. Maybe there was some dirt or bug with the long legs on the door hole ends. Years later, I found out more about the Stickman, Hatman, and Shadow People phenomenon, and that really creeped me out. Story 4. Encounter with a demonic entity. I live in the country, just outside of a few medium-sized towns in western Illinois, very close to the Iowa-Illinois border near the Mississippi River. I've had a few paranormal experiences before, ranking them when I was pretty small up until now. Some of my other family members have also had some. I've told very few of this experience because I was afraid people would think I was crazy or lying, but I swear on everything dear to me that this happened on an October day 11 years ago. I was 15 at the time. My grandparents took my best girlfriend Stacy and me to run errands with them one afternoon, and they decided it would be fun to take us to a pumpkin patch since it was close to Halloween. This pumpkin patch was a few counties northeast of us, I think, and it was a lot of fun. It had hay rides, a corn maze, and a barn where we could get apple cider and other harvest goodies. Of course, it also had a really big pumpkin patch where we could pick our own pumpkins right off the vine. There were quite a few families with younger kids there that day. I remember it was really sunny and unseasonably warm for October. Grandma and Grandpa told us that we can go off on our own and explore the farm. So, Stacy and I made off for the pumpkin patch, which I think took up about 6 acres. I think that's what the sign on the road said. The pumpkin patch was just huge and sprawling. The patch wasn't laid out in a straight level field or square though, like a lot of them are. There were little dirt paths, hills, a stream, and small thickets and patches of trees that separated and split up parts of it. It twisted around a corner behind the woods a little, if you can imagine what I'm describing. Stacy and I were having fun walking the length of the pumpkin patch and exploring all of the little nooks and crannies of the field, and we finally turned around that corner at the very tail end of the patch, so that we were out of sight of the main farm where my grandparents and all the other customers were. When we went around that bend, we saw that they were facing a pretty dense thicket with lots of trees. We could see the woods extended up a decent-sized hill, and that there was a rocky crevice forming part of that hill. There was water running down the crevice in the form of a small waterfall that emptied out into the brook at the bottom of the base of the trees, and ran into the woods somewhere out of sight. I remember we just stood there in awe because it was really pretty, with the sunlight shimmering in the water and all of the red and orange leaves falling all over the place. Stacy got the bright idea to see how far back the brook went from the waterfall. Stacy was always rather bossy, and though I felt like we shouldn't, we went anyway because I didn't want to argue with her. We stepped over the boundary of the end of the patch and into the thicket. Almost immediately, after about 10 steps following the stream, we came upon a small brick building. I don't really know what it was for, but it was made of red brick and was pretty low to the ground. Had a squarish hexagon shape to it. It had a chimney up one side, one door made of metal, and a window on at least 2 sides of it. It was way too small to be a house, even for one person. It reminded me of the little bathroom buildings found in some of the public parks. And here's where the terrifying thing happened. When Stacy and I walked around the side of it to inspect it, the window on the right side of the building, there was a face peering out at us. I know this sounds stupid, but it looked like a pig with pitch black fur on its skin and face, opaque red eyes, and really long, sharp teeth hanging out of its mouth. The teeth were not long, like tusks. It didn't have any tusks. They were more like human teeth of all the same length that were freakishly long, jutting out of its mouth. The expression on its face is what scared me the most. It looked mean, angry, or just outright hostile. It looked like it wanted to hurt us, and it must have been tall because I could tell it wasn't on all fours like a regular pig would be. To be looking out of the window, it had to be standing or at least hunching over like a man on 2 feet. As soon as Stacy and I set eyes on this creature, she said, "Oh my God!" And the thing screamed. It was like the sound of a cow makes when it's mad or stressed, but crossed with a human. It wasn't a scared shriek. It was like it wanted to attack. As I said, I got the feeling that it wanted to hurt us, or was angry that we were there. We both screamed and almost pushed each other over trying to run from that building. I didn't know if it was behind us or not, but I was in survival mode and didn't look back to check. We finally reached the edge of the pumpkin patch, jumped over the brook, and ran the whole 6 acres to the farm. Once we got down to where all the other people were, Stacy just stopped and stood, frozen by a vegetable stand, and wouldn't move. It was like she was in shock. I went to open the barn where Grandma and Grandpa were talking to the guy who owned the farm. They saw my face and knew something was wrong. Grandmother and grandfather and the farmer ushered me back behind the barn so the little kids and families wouldn't hear whatever I had to say. I told them exactly what we'd seen. Grandpa didn't want to believe me and said we had just spooked ourselves. We went and got Stacy, who was still by the front of the barn looking traumatized. When they were finally able to get her to talk, she told them the exact same thing. Here's the thing though. As soon as the farmer realized which little brick building we'd seen, his face went white. It looked like he had been slapped. Grandpa asked him what was the matter. The farmer whispered something to him, and Grandpa told us to go wait in the car. We did. When Grandpa came back, he looked very shaken. He got in and told Stacy, Grandma, and me what the farmer confided to him. The farmer's family had owned that property for almost a century, and back in the 1930s, the farmer's uncle had told them all that he'd seen a demon that looked like a pig in the woods, that it lived in that little building. The farmer's family didn't believe his uncle, thinking he was making up stories or maybe becoming mentally ill. Then, at the tail end of the 30s, his uncle went missing for about 5 days. Finally, one of the family members found his uncle's dead body in that same little building. Not a mark on him, and the coroner couldn't figure out what happened. He had been perfectly healthy in his late teens and early 20s and had no injuries they could find. He just dropped dead on the floor of that same little building for no reason. The farmer also told Grandpa that once in a while, he still hears some unidentifiable animal shrieking or howling out in the woods at the edge of the field, but can't identify what kind of animal could make a sound like that. The farmer's family always reported that sound off and on the property since his uncle's death. Story 5. The Okefenokee Encounter. 2 men that lived in the outer area of the Okefenokee decided to explore deep into the swamp. After a couple of weeks, the men were shocked by what they saw. A footprint, some 18 inches long and 9 inches wide. The men quickly headed for home, fearing the beast that was responsible for the gigantic prints. The two men told their strange story to others living on the swamp, and soon a group of 7 men decided to go back into the swamp to hunt down the huge creature. After a couple of weeks, the group was at the spot where the 2 men had found the giant print. It was still there. As it was late in the day, the men settled in, planning to continue the hunt the following day. Then, in seconds, the gigantic beast was in their camp, exploding out of the dense vegetation, a creature some 13 feet tall and covered with hair. The men grabbed their weapons and opened fire. Although wounded, the creature continued on and attacked the men. 5 of the 7 were killed. The creature then collapsed, mortally wounded. As the 2 survivors looked on the dying beast, it let out terrifying screams. The 2 men, fearing the screams could attract more of the creatures, fled the area, leaving their fallen fellow hunters behind. The truth of this report can never be known, and it may have been written for entertainment purposes. But if true, it is one of the earliest written reports of an encounter with a Bigfoot-type creature by a non-Native American. This story first appeared from Georgia in January of 1829. Story 6. The Beast of Bladdenboro. The Beast of Bladdenboro story took place from December of 1953 through January of 1954. In some ways, the Beast of Bladdenboro reminds one of the Timber Creek monster. In both cases, an unknown creature appeared to go on a mass killing spree, seemingly killing for sport. While the Timber Creek monster was eventually killed and identified, the Bladdenboro beast was never caught, and what the creature really was still remains unknown. In a period of about a month, the Beast of Bladdenboro was believed to have killed over 100 animals in and around Bladdenboro, North Carolina. Goats, cows, hogs, rabbits, and many dogs all fell victim to this beast. The manner of death was quite gruesome, the victims often being torn apart, or as one man put it, shredded to ribbons. Jaws were ripped off, animals decapitated, and skulls crushed. At one point, the mayor of Bladdenboro posed for a picture with a dead bobcat, claiming that the Bladdenboro beast had been caught. However, a bobcat is just not capable of causing the type of injuries suffered by the victims. The descriptions of the Bladdenboro beast varied, indicating that there very well might have been one or more animal involved in the killings. From sleek, black, and about 2 feet tall at the shoulders to 3 feet tall with brown fur. At one point, on 2 consecutive nights, hunting parties of more than 800 men searched the area for the Beast of Bladdenboro, but came up with nothing. By the end of January, the killing had stopped. The question remains, however, what was the beast? Some say it was a wolf, but this is unlikely. 2 of the men that hunted the beast tracked it for several miles. From the tracks they followed, they identified the beast as a big cat and weighing between 70 to 80 pounds. They never saw the creature though, and there is no way to know if the creature they were following was in fact the Beast of Bladdenboro. The most likely animal that could have been responsible for the killings would seem to be a panther or cougar. Females do weigh in at 70 to 80 pounds, and there was at least a dozen on the report of the beast, where a smaller one was also seen. Some estimates on the size of the beast went as high as 150 pounds, which is the size of an adult male cougar. Story 7. The Grey Man of Ben Macdui Mountain. In the Scottish Highlands lies a mountain where numerous have actually experienced a fear quite unlike anything else they have ever felt. As the frogs and mists roll all around the cairns, they say there lurks a creature massive and terrifying. They call it Am Fear Liath Moor, or the Big Grey Man. Some see him as an old figure in robes, a giant, or even a devil. The creature doesn't just threaten with the force of physical power. This beast also causes an almost suicidal sense of depression and panic in all who come near it. Ben Macdui is the second highest mountain in Scotland, standing at over 4,000 feet. It is an imposing sight and a substantial test for the experienced climber. Many of the witnesses who observe or feel the presence of the Grey Man are serious, hardened mountaineers, not prone to flights of fancy. The first person to have a written experience was Professor Norman Colley. Colley was a respected and well-known climber, but when he gave a speech to his club in 1925, the audience was truly stunned. Colley revealed that he had been coming down from the top of the mountain in 1891 when he had heard footsteps behind him. In the beginning, shrouded in the mist, he rationalized that it must have just been an echo of his own footfalls. But at some point, he realized the noises he heard was not corresponding to the moves he was making. It sounded like a giant was following him. He said it was as if someone was walking after me, but taking steps 3 or 4 times the length of my own. Frightened, Colley thoughtlessly ran 4 or 5 miles down the mountainside until he could no longer hear the noise. Colley never returned to the mountain, and to his dying day, absolutely believed there was something very strange about the mountain. During the Second World War, Peter Densham was a mountain rescue worker, locating and saving pilots who had crashed in the mountains. One day, he was at the top of the Ben Macdui when he had heard a heavy mist starting to fall. He sat and waited for conditions to improve. After some time, he started to hear weird crunching noises and instantly felt a presence close by. He stood up to explore, but was immediately seized by a feeling of panic. Before he then realized what was happening, he was running down the mountain, dangerously close to the sheer cliff edge. He said afterwards, "I tried to stop myself and found this incredibly hard to do. It was as if someone was pushing me. I managed to deflect my course, but with a great deal of difficulty." Since that time, a lot of people have noticed a strange being or felt an overwhelming sense of impending doom in the area. One of the most recent encounters occurred in the early 1990s. 3 men were walking in a forest just outside of Aberdeen. One of the party spotted a human-shaped figure running across the track a little ways ahead. He told his friends, and when they all looked in the same direction, they saw a strange, not quite human face. A few weeks later, the same group were driving in the area when they realized that they were being followed by the same tall, dark being. The creature kept pace, even at speeds of 45 miles an hour, but eventually tired and stopped. Again, these men felt a distinct sense of terror and foreboding. Beast enthusiasts have lots of ideas about the creature's origin. Some say he could be an extraterrestrial being, or the ghost of an old Highland race, or even a mystical, wise religious figure. One interesting story is that atop of the mountain there is a gateway to another dimension, and this creature is the gatekeeper. If this really is his role, then he is doing a good job. After an experience with the big gray man, very few people have dared to venture up the mountain ever again. Story 8. An encounter with the grinning man. At about 9:45 p.m. on October 11th, 1966, 2 boys, Martin and James, were walking home in Elizabeth, New Jersey. The boys soon came to the corner of 4th Street and New Jersey Street. The elevated New Jersey Turnpike was overhead. A steep bank of about 30 feet runs from the turnpike to the street below and was blocked off by a tall chain-link fence. The boys were at point directly across the street from the fence. James and the other boy had never seen anyone behind the fence before, but that night would be very different. James would see the grinning man first, and after nudging his friend, saw the man also. The area was well lit by the streetlights, so the two were able to see the strange being very clearly. At first, his back was towards the boys, but they could see that he was wearing green, sparkling coveralls with a wide black belt, and was well over 6 feet tall, and appeared to be bald. Then, the grinning man turned and was looking straight at them. The boys reported that the man had huge ear-to-ear grin with a dark complexion and had beady dark eyes, set unusually wide apart. Both the boys were terrified by the stranger and quickly left the area, leaving the grinning man behind. Strangely, when interviewed by police later on that evening, the 2 boys could not even recall if the grinning man had a nose or even had ears. Author John Keel heard about the grinning man report and traveled to Elizabeth just 3 days after the grinning man's sighting to interview both boys. Keel was accompanied by UFO investigator James Mosley and actor Chuck McCann. Story 9. The Lizard Man of Scape Ore Swamp. If there weren't a road running through it, the swamps would be completely vacant of humans. Rockfish Lane is a small 2-lane road that cuts directly through the center of Scape Swamp, home to the Lizard Man, and it has been the focus not just of sightings such as that listed above, but some much more terrifying things. Original sightings of the creature following the first Davis sighting were spreading like a rash. Local law enforcement officials reacted to the reports of the Lizard Man with both concern and obvious skepticism. While the idea that there may be a man-sized 2-legged swamp creature in their county's backyard was hard to swallow, it was also difficult to ignore the number of reports that many of these reports had made by reliable people. In 1989, expeditions were assembled to enter the swamps, and on these, the sheriff's department discovered tracks left by a 2-legged creature with 3 toes deep within the Scape Swamp. From the spacing of the imprints, it was determined that the creature stood upright, but when turned over to the local biologists and experts on the swamps, their conclusion was that their prints were just unclassifiable. South Carolina Marine Resources Department spokesperson Johnny Evans said that the tracks neither matched nor could be mistaken for the footprints of any recorded animal. He also outright dismissed the possibility that these were the prints of a mutated or deformed creature, or that they were even manufactured. The prints were also sent to the FBI for further analysis, but were never returned and no conclusion was ever offered. Fortunately, that wasn't the only evidence. The same year, Kenneth Orr, an airman stationed at the nearby Shaw Air Force Base, reported to the authorities that not only had been attacked by the creature, but that he had fired 2 shots at it and wounded it. He was also able to provide the authorities with several scales and a small quantity of blood as evidence. Orr described the Lizard Man as being over 7 feet tall, walking on 2 legs and muscular. He described its flesh as covered in dark hair with scaly lizard green skin on its hands, feet, and face. Orr added that it may have also had a tail, but was uncertain. The explanation behind the Lizard Man of Scape Swamp remains to this day a mystery. Numerous investigators, both amateur and professional, have explored the swamps without results, but sightings continued. There have been additional attacks since the Kenneth Orr account, including Lizard Man's assault on Bob Rawson and his wife while they were driving through the region. The damage to the Rawson's car, as shown in the Bob Rawson's interview with CNN, is startling to say the least. The idea of a 7-foot-tall, half-man, half-lizard creature is so over-the-top ridiculous to so many people that cryptids of this type don't generally make it to mainstream knowledge. But the fact is that the Lizard Man of Scape Swamp is far from the only one. There are reports of lizard men from Chile to Canada, and in fact, tales of lizard men date back thousands of years. In ancient China, they were regarded as great spirits and called dragon kings. The ancient Sumerians worshipped them, a serpentine man said to serve the Hydra. Whether or not there is any reality that brought about these ancient stories, or whether or not the depictions of the Lizard Man of Scape Swamp are exaggerated, there is one thing for certain. There is something in the swamp with claws strong enough to tear through metal. Story 10. The Flying Creature from Houston. The event took place at 118 East 3rd Street at about 2:30 a.m. It was a sweltering night at the time that millions of Americans did not have air conditioning for. Relief from the heat was often sought on the front porch, as was the case on the night of June 18th. 3 neighbors had gathered on the front porch of 23-year-old Hilda Walker. In addition to Mrs. Walker, were 33-year-old Howard Phillips and Judy Myers, age 14. As the 3 passed the time with small talk, Walker glanced toward the streetlight. She later said, 25 feet away I saw a huge shadow across the lawn. I thought at first it was the magnified reflection of a big moth caught in the nearby streetlight. Then the shadow seemed to bounce upwards into a pecan tree. We all looked up, and that's when we saw it. What the 3 saw was described as a humanoid and about 6 feet tall. It had large wings, similar to a bat, and appeared to be wearing some type of tight-fitting black suit. All 3 of the witnesses also described the thing in the pecan tree as being surrounded by a yellowish glow. When first seen, the glow was quite bright but rapidly began to fade. It was just as the glow went out that a terrified Judy Myers screamed. At that moment, the bat-winged creature vanished. Mrs. Walker described what happened next. Immediately afterwards, we heard a loud swoosh over the housetops across the street. It was like the white flash of a torpedo-shaped object. I've heard so much about flying saucer stories, and I thought all those people telling the stories were crazy. But now, I don't know what to believe. I may be nuts, but I saw it. Whatever it was. I sat there stupefied. I was amazed. The strange thing seen by 3 neighbors was never reported again, but some years later, another flying nightmare would be later seen in Houston, this time at the home of the American space program, NASA. Hey guys, I hope you enjoyed this video. Be sure to like and comment below. Also, if you really enjoyed my content, go ahead and subscribe. I'm going to be trying to having a lot more frequent creatures and cool other scary stories up, as well as some really cool compilations coming soon with other scary narrators. Keep a lookout for that. Also, be sure to get your own official What Lurks Beneath t-shirt or coffee mug in the Teespring link below in the description. And if you have a scary story or encounter you would like to share with me, you could also send that to me in the email below or just write it out in a comment to this video. Thanks everyone. Have a wonderful night.